Welcome to GNCC Espresso Live, brought to you in partnership with TD Commercial Banking. My name is Mishka Balsam, and I will be your moderator for the next hour. The purpose of this series is to better understand how COVID-19 has impacted our life, our communities, and how it will shape our future so that we can ensure a resilient recovery within the post-pandemic environment. Specifically today, we are focusing on a sector that is vital to Niagara, the retail sector, as it is one of our key economic drivers, adds to our quality of life, and employs a significant percentage of our population. In 2019, retail trade businesses provided over 25,000 full and part-time jobs, representing nearly 14% of all jobs in Niagara. How has this pandemic changed how we shop and how we work? How has COVID-19 impacted our corporate structures, employees and customers, our business operations? And how will it reshape our collective priorities? But before we get into today's discussion, let me pass it over to Scott Galbraith, District VP for TD Commercial Banking, providing us with an introductory message. Over to you.
Good morning. My name is Scott Galbraith, and I'm the District Vice President for TD Business Banking, covering the Niagara Peninsula. It is our continued pleasure to come to you as the sponsors of the GNCC Espresso series. It's our pleasure to continue to assist in providing valuable information to those of you in the business community and to continue supporting everyone through these uncertain times. We hope you enjoy the content of today's presentation. If you do have concerns or questions about banking or anything related to TD, certainly feel free to reach out to myself or Jennifer Monaco, whose information will be provided at the end of the presentation. Jen is the relationship manager for TD, covering the peninsula. Thanks again to Mishka and everyone at the Chamber for the invitation to continue to participate, and we hope you enjoy the presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much to TD Commercial Banking for all that you do for the community and especially for businesses here in Niagara. During this interactive session, we are privileged to be joined by our guests today: Helen Edwards, Marketing Director, Penn Centre; Daniel Safayeni, Director of Policy, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce; and Thalia Semplonius, Project Manager with Niagara Workforce Planning Board. Thank you for being with us this morning. And to all participants, we are wanting to encourage a great interaction and a great dialogue. You are currently on mute, but you have two options to actually enter the dialogue and be part of it. You will see on the right-hand side of your screen the symbol of a hand. By clicking that, we know that you want to ask a question and we will unmute you. So please watch for it. And the second option that is available to you is the option called chat. It's a field where you can type in the question. I will see it here on our end, and we will do our best to get to all of the questions that are coming forward during this next hour. But lastly, we have received a high number of questions, either through social media or via email, and I'm going to start out with one of them. So maybe I am going to start with Helen and maybe Daniel at the same time. But Helen, maybe for you first, how has COVID-19 impacted the retail trade sector? And what has been some of its broader implications that you have experienced right here at the Penn Centre?
Thank you, Mishka. So it's had a profound impact on us. In March, when we went down to an essential services shutdown, we saw all but 6 of our retailers close. And so that was a big hit to the experience at the shopping center. There was a big hit to the community. But one of the things that we have seen is that our consumers, our retailers really kind of pivoted through this experience. So in May, they started actually utilizing the e-commerce platforms and really connecting with their customers again. From an experience for us, when we reopened in June, obviously there were a lot of people that came in that wanted to see what the Penn Centre looked like now that we were reopened. And it was signage, it was communication. That's the role of marketing right now. now is just creating that safe space for people to shop in. So, and our retailers really stepped up to that, but there was a lot of investment and a lot of hard work that went into creating that space.
No, it makes full sense. And we honestly congratulate you, your team, and all the retailers at the Penn Center and across Niagara actually for really having stepped up to the challenges that are there and pivoting their business that's there. Daniel, if I can ask you maybe the same question on it, and if you can give us a little bit of a perspective from an Ontario-wide perspective, how has it impacted the retail sector, COVID-19, how has it impacted it? And what are some of the broader implications when you're looking down the road and saying, this is maybe what we can expect?
Yeah, for sure. It's a good question. I think if we were to look before the pandemic, retail sales in Canada were expected to rise by roughly 5% in 2020. But once COVID-19 hit, for many retailers, this meant, of course, lower revenues, higher costs, both to enable physical distancing, acquire PPE, expand e-commerce, et cetera. The impact has been most severe for retailers that were deemed A, non-essential, and B, had physical locations. So what we saw here in Ontario was that monthly sales dropped between February and April by 37%. But then on a positive note, actually returned to pre-pandemic levels in August. And that varies by category of retail trade. And we can get into that, I think, later on in the discussion. And the other thing that I'm sure we're going to touch on more is in terms of looking ahead is that e-commerce sales soared to record levels. So they increased by 99.3% from February to May. So almost during that same period, that traditional sales dropped by almost 40%. You see e-commerce sales jumping up by almost 100%. Now, the one thing to add to this is a little bit about confidence and how the retail sector is feeling in general. So we've been in market with a survey from September to October of over 1,000 Ontario-based businesses. And what we see from that is that the retail trade segment of that survey, they report feeling confidence levels that are below that of the average business in Ontario. So 17% of retail trade businesses reported feeling confident in Ontario's economic outlook. That's compared to the 20% average. And then when you look at confidence in their own organization and how they expect their own retail business to perform in the coming year, 42% of retailers in Ontario are confident about their own organization's outlook, compared to the 50% average for Ontario-based businesses. So what this tells us is that there has been an aggregate impact on the retail sector at large, which has resulted in their confidence perhaps expectedly being slightly below that of the rest of Ontario-based businesses.
No, thank you very much, actually. And it's really valuable to actually have that broader perspective on this particular sector. Helen, if I can bring you into this conversation, you're in touch with your businesses and your tenants on a daily basis. Does that mirror what you're experiencing at the Penn Center?
Absolutely. When to Daniel's point, when we reopened, we had three different kinds of shoppers. We had the ones that were coming in just quickly to see what the experience looked like, and then they left. We had the other ones that came in and now we're coining the phrase shop with purpose, because they had their list. They just wanted to go and get those items that they couldn't get when we were shut down. And then they left. And then we had the other ones that seemed like they had a little bit more confidence to browse. And this is what our retailers are saying, is that as they're coming into the store, as we've been open for a few more months now, people are feeling a little bit more relaxed about staying in the store for a little bit longer, but we're definitely not seeing what we saw post-COVID, pre-COVID. It really was a definitely more relaxed experience. And the one thing that we're also seeing is we don't attract a lot of kids into the shopping center. So before, you would see families bring their kids, and it was a whole experience. Let me go get a meal. We'll do a little bit of shopping. Again, that's come down to more of a focus of get what you need and leave. So I do believe that it's going to take some time for us to slowly build that. And I think messages from the provincial government on just, they're reinforcing essential. So, essential families, essential shopping, essential dining, that really is reinforcing the behavior. But our tenants, the ones that are struggling are the ones that were struggling really prior to COVID. The other ones are starting to see a lift in sales, which is really positive.
Yeah, which is very, very nice to see, actually. And we will go into that a little bit further, like in our dialogue, because some sectors have actually benefited in this time and have seen some growth, whereas others haven't. But Thalia, I wanted to bring you into this dialogue because from a little bit of a different perspective now is looking in Niagara and Ontario, a high number of our labor force is employed in the sector. Could you give us some kind of a sense, regional perspective, how COVID has impacted this particular sector, especially when we look at it from an employment point of view?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start out with some of the provincial trends just because I think it puts Niagara's trends into perspective. So when we look at employment across the retail trade industry in Ontario, we saw a significant drop in people reporting employment in the sector between February and April. So almost a 22% decrease in people reporting employment there. Since May in Ontario, employment slowly increased with employment counts in October in the sector reaching a similar level of employment to what we saw last year in October. In Niagara, we see a little bit of a different story here. So local data, our employment data is lumped into wholesale and retail trade. So we're not able to separate the two out. So I'll be speaking to wholesale and retail trade as a whole. We know that last year, this is our largest sector of employment. So we had just over 31,000 people reporting employment in wholesale and retail trade. So that's about 16% of all employment in Niagara. When we look at monthly employment counts and look at the impacts of COVID, we saw a significant drop in the number of people employed in wholesale and retail trade following the outbreak of the pandemic. So between February and June, the number of people working in this industry decreased from about 32,300 people to just under 25,000 people, which contrasts the seasonal increase that we normally see during this period. And then since June, we've been hovering at about 25,000 people reporting employment in wholesale and retail trade this year. So that's through to October, compared to last year where we saw between 31,000 and 32,000 people across those months reporting employment. So it's definitely lower. Ontario data, I know we speak about this regional level data, it's based on a rolling average. So it takes the prior couple of months into account, but still we've remained pretty steady. So moving forward, we'll see whether this continues to change or not.
Yeah. I really appreciate that because it really gives us a sense of that we are, as a community, all in this together. Like, it's not just our own habits about where do we shop, where do we go to, but it also means that the employment and livelihood of other people that are impacted by it. Daniel, from a provincial perspective, do you want to give us a little bit of a sense of what the province is experiencing when it comes to the labor force impact of the changes that we're seeing in the retail sector?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to build off of what Thalia is saying, the 16% of jobs in the Hamilton, Niagara Peninsula that are in the retail and wholesale trade area is actually emblematic to what the percentages are in the rest of Ontario too. So similar to Ontario's overall percentage in the retail sector is about 15%. So it's similar. I think what makes Niagara a more unique case is that the retail industry in this region is intertwined with tourism. and tourism has of course taken a major hit, and those two definitely feed into each other. But you know, I believe that in general, you know, business confidence has decreased naturally, as one would expect. Not to point too gloomy of a picture, but it has had a disproportionate effect when we break out the statistics for the Hamilton Niagara Peninsula, which is a region as defined by Statistics Canada, but covers this geographic area. So what we see here when we look at the survey results from the survey that I referred to just earlier is that businesses in this region are less likely to believe that their community has enough economic opportunity for them to thrive. So when you compare the specific Hamilton Niagara Peninsula region to that of the rest of Ontario, 39% in the Hamilton Niagara Peninsula believe their local community has what it takes for them to thrive versus the 61% provincial average. And then when you look at business confidence in Ontario's economic outlook, it was actually lower in the Hamilton Niagara Peninsula than that of the rest of Ontario, 12 versus 20% respectively. And the same too goes in organizational confidence, 39 versus 50%. And I think taking a step back, Mishka, to your question, you know, I think what this tells us is there's a great deal of angst and uncertainty among Ontario businesses at large, but ones that are in areas that are specifically tied to economies driven by tourism and other aspects that are likely to be slower to come back in the COVID-19 world. And we'll get into this later. I think that underscores the importance of government support programs in both giving the businesses the confidence they need to see this through, but also, you know, riffing off of what Helen's saying, consumer confidence is also extraordinarily important here too. And if we want to get back to you know, pre-pandemic spending levels, we're going to need to see increased consumer confidence as well.
It's a very interesting point that you're making, and especially comparing our region to other regions and looking at the level of business confidence that people have in their own community that's there. Thalia, I'm going to bring you back into this dialogue. Is there any data that you have looked at that actually supports that we have in Niagara, maybe that people perceive that there's less economic opportunity to thrive, that there's less confidence there? Does it show in any of our numbers when we look at the recovery, the economic recovery that we are experiencing here?
That's a great question. And I think part of it has to do with consumer confidence, which I can speak to a little bit. So locally, what we've seen is that local employers have indicated that one of the largest obstacles to recovery moving forward would be the slow return of customers. So definitely consumer sentiments and behaviors would be key to recovery as well. I don't know if we want to get into all the consumer sentiments right now, but definitely moving forward, that seems to be top of mind for employers other than keeping their head above water right now too.
Yeah, I think it does make a big and significant difference. Helen, Daniel also spoke about the link between retail sales and tourism. And we have, during this time, tourism has been very hard hit, hardest hit likely sector that we are experiencing. And it's indicated also that it's will take the longest for it to recover. And on top of it, we have a border and a supply chain interruption, which likely will impact all of this and the recovery and the speed of the recovery at the same time. Can you maybe venture a little bit into the link between retail and tourism that you're experiencing here in Niagara, and give us a little bit of your insight on that?
Sure. So we're lucky in one sense that, you know, Penn Center is not really a tourism destination. So we have a very small percentage, about 10% of our shoppers are tourism based. But we are affected by what happens with the border. And definitely, you know, it's kind of been a love-hate. So obviously with the border being closed, we're seeing more shoppers, you know, spending money locally that, and definitely I know we'll get into Black Friday, but that is going to be a key for us. But the other thing to your point is just getting product into stores. So there's quite a few stores that rely on that chain that comes from the border that are saying to us, you know, maybe, you know, turnaround. So when we opened in June, we still had spring merchandise. And so we're looking to turn over those stores and to be relevant to those consumers that are coming in. And the product in some cases is not coming over fast enough. So that's definitely a concern as we go into the next season, which is, you know, our busiest one, is what kind of quantities that we'll have in those stores. So it has a big role in what we do.
Can I ask you this? I'm just wondering about this out loud. The border is closed. People have to stay closer to home. Is there a benefit to the Penn Center in something like this, where people are maybe not traveling as much and maybe because of that have a higher disposable income to spend closer to home?
Absolutely, there is. So, you know, most people that know me know that I wasn't born and raised in Niagara. I came from a different area. So when I got here, it was very interesting for me to hear people say, you know, oh, I went across the river to get, you know, my groceries or to get gas. And I thought, what? Because for me, that was always a 2-hour drive to go into the States. So that is part of the culture here, is going across to the border. And we definitely see it during key periods of time like Black Friday, like the holidays, where they're going there, maybe not just for, you know, a discount, but they're going for a different experience. So we actually are starting to see more people that would typically go across the border. Now they're actually coming into the shopping center. And there's a level of fear when it comes to crossing the border. So I think even if it opened, there would still be a lot of people that would say, no, I'm going to stay here, because they are concerned about what's happening in the States.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Daniel, there's a question also that someone had asked us about, and they said they heard in Niagara, but I think it's province-wide, it's countrywide. We hear about success stories on the one hand and challenges, and other stores that are experiencing more challenges. And you hinted at it a couple of minutes ago. Can we take a moment to maybe evaluate which retail sectors have seen actually growth and which have retracted?
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question, and it is important to unpack this a little bit, because it's not consistent across the board. So, you know, when you look back to from March to August in terms of month-over-month sales, clothing and accessories actually saw the biggest drop. So between February and April, they dropped about 168% during that period, and has not rebounded as much as some of the other sectors have. Excuse me, still down 17% in August. Meanwhile, on the other hand, we see a sector like food and beverage, which has largely remained stable, actually increasing slightly in the summer months. Other sectors which took a huge hit at the beginning are starting to recover, which is the good news. So for instance, motor vehicle and auto parts saw a fairly significant decline in the early months of the pandemic. Since then has basically rebounded to pre-pandemic levels. So, you know, understandably, and both Helen and Thalia have spoken to how consumer patterns are shifting and behaviors are shifting. And so I think we're seeing retailers respond to that. But across a number of these sectors that had early early big hits, they're starting to bounce back a little bit now, which is a positive news. We'll see if that continues to hold through the second wave, and as consumer confidence drops off a little bit, according to some of the latest numbers. So hopefully that continues to hold, and hopefully things like e-commerce allows them to continue to sell even through the second wave.
I really appreciate actually when we take a look at the retail trade sector and actually dive into it a little bit. The success stories that we have heard from our members in Niagara business community have been recreational items and anything related to recreational sports, really big sales. Like if it's your kayak, if it's your bike, if it's any one of those items, huge. Patios and outdoor, seating areas. We hear about home improvements, anything related to it, appliances, for example, high in demand as people are staying closer to local and looking at making improvements there. We also have to consider that Niagara is a market where we have a lot of traditional snowbirds, people who would travel south and who are now actually staying here for the winter or have come back early, and the impact of those. Are there any numbers or any support that you have of sectors that have really seen actually growth and where the demand has been higher than it ever has been in beforehand? Daniel?
Certainly, a number of the sectors that you actually just touched on have seen some steady growth in the last couple of months. But even, for instance, according to the statistics, it's a bit counterintuitive, but the sporting goods, hobby, books, and music stores category, which fall into kind of the home improvement and sporting goods, originally did suffer fairly big losses in the early months. Since then has bounced back. So over the last couple of months, averaging about 10%-ish growth, which is good. Furniture and home furnishing stores, which is another category you mentioned, also took a heavy drop in the early months, but has been bouncing back. And I'm sure part of this is what we've also discussed just briefly, is the time it will take for some of these retailers to adjust their supply chains, adjust their offerings, and be able to pivot successfully to e-commerce and ensure that they can reach their consumer, even if folks are not going into stores as frequently. So I think some of that original drop-off was because naturally there was a process to pivot and to ensure that things could be offered online. And that's why you'd see big swings in, for instance, the furniture and home furnishing stores category, which went from, dropping almost 100% month over month in the early months of the pandemic to rebounding to pre-pandemic levels now.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thalia, a question that has come forward from one of our attendees is asking and was wondering about your insight when it comes to the real estate boom in Niagara. So real estate is a hot commodity right now. We have exceeded our residential real estate sales year to date when we compare to 2019. And there's also at the same time an anticipation that we are going to have a population growth here in Niagara. Can you maybe speak to that aspect of it and maybe the impact it has on retail trade?
That is a great question. I don't have too much data on me in terms of the housing market. From what I've been reading, it looks like Niagara has been one of the top hot housing markets lately. So if that's the case and people start purchasing here, we would see population growth due to people moving into the region if they're coming from outside of it. I would expect then if it's people moving with more disposable income, it could be income that could be spent in local retail. Again, I don't have numbers to support this. This is me hypothesizing on potential outcomes if these trends do hold.
Yeah, and actually, you know what, I think this is all that we can do at this point.
Yeah.
The numbers are, it's too new of a trend to have actually the data and the numbers that that would support it. But Helen, I think you as being like a marketing manager for the Penn Center. I think you're probably in the same boat that you and your colleagues have written a strategic plan for this year and next year, and probably have rewritten it about 5 more times in between. I think I hear this from every organization, every business, and we're no different in that end of it. You see these, the real estate numbers, you see and hear what the population growth anticipation is for Niagara. Is that an opportunity for retailers when you look at it, and when you're saying, here's our plan for the next year, for the next 2 years, what we're expecting? Do you see that as being an opportunity?
Oh, 100%. You know, the population changes, it ebbs and flows right now. And what we're looking at is, you know, absolutely from a leasing perspective, what we offer is that enough for this new consumer that's coming in. You know, how do we change? So we, you know, just before COVID hit, we finished off our redevelopment, you know, and looking at who's going to fill those spaces, and what the needs of the community are critical to our success. Even when we look at, you know, our sales each month and how our tenants are doing, you know, we can almost see that change even prior to COVID. So it's interesting. My take on this kind of resurgence of people coming into this area, I think definitely, you know, COVID has forced us to rethink everything. And definitely one of the biggest things is how we work. And now with, you know, a lot of businesses in Toronto only bringing back maybe 25% of their employees, the majority are working from home. You know, I think the Niagara region probably represents a really nice compromise for people to actually live in a community where they feel like it's a more relaxed pace. But if they're only going into Toronto maybe 2-3 times a month, that's now a solution for them. So, you know, we're excited about that growth, but you're absolutely right about the planning. We did a modified plan just before we reopened. We've modified the modified plan, and now we've done one for 2021 that will be modified again. So, you know, it's just every day is a new day.
Yeah, I agree. This is one of the questions, actually, Helen, that's directed at you as well, that has come in over the last couple of days. And the question is, what role has e-commerce and digital marketing played in the success of stores in the retail sector here in Niagara and Ontario-wide? And I think every panelist today has kind of touched on it a little bit, but I was wondering if maybe you can expand on it a little bit and maybe share even some of the success stories so that it actually helps other retailers at the same time.
Absolutely. So as you know, e-commerce has always kind of had a love-hate relationship with bricks and mortar, right? So it's not a new thing that we've been challenged with. It is definitely something that has been on our radar and has been growing every single year as, you know, more of a convenience factor to be at home to order the product and get it delivered within 24 hours. What worked for us is that we have 2,000 employees that work at the Penn Center. And when 2,000 employees are unemployed, that's a big hit to the community. And so what a lot of our retailers did, they pivoted. So if they already had an e-commerce platform, they actually brought employees back into the shopping center so that they could fulfill orders locally, which was amazing. And also now they're looking at, you know, curbside pickup and how they can do that, because we saw great success with Walmart and Zehrs, who were still open as essential services, and, you know, at one point had a difficult time having enough employees on site to fulfill the orders that were coming through for curbside and online. So we've had some great successes. I would say a traditional store that has been here for forever, which is the boot shop, that really never looked at e-commerce, that is now doing e-commerce. And it's becoming a stronger revenue stream for them. So back to the original point of everybody's had to reevaluate how they do business, that's been across the board with all of our tenants. And, you know, for the Penn Center as well, you know, we sell gift cards. How do we actually continue that revenue stream when our guest services is down? So, you know, it's forcing us to reevaluate how we interact with our consumer. And as far as, you know, a digital, that became the only way that we could communicate with shoppers. So it played such a critical role in everything that we did, because even though we're a shopping center, we're still the resource for the community. So that communication didn't stop while we were shut down. In fact, it ramped up because consumers were looking for us to give them updates on what was happening, not just in the mall and in retail, but in the community.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Daniel, I think this is a good time to also bring this question forward to you. You had mentioned earlier about the impact that e-commerce digital has on all retail businesses that are there. What are some of the trends that we're seeing in Ontario or Canada-wide, worldwide likely? Are they going to stay in place, and what does it mean to the retail sector?
Yeah, for sure. It's a good question. The one thing, just to build off of what we were previously chatting about in terms of some sectors that have seen unprecedented growth, a lot of that has happened on the back of e-commerce. And so the furniture sector, which originally was down, experienced a 191% growth in e-commerce sales. So that has largely allowed that sector to recover and even grow. General merchandise, 170% increase in e-commerce sales through the pandemic. Mishka, you were talking about sporting goods. That category has seen 155% increase in e-commerce sales. So e-commerce is the big change, and that is likely here to stay. And Helen was talking about this as well. You know, according to a recent survey, 87% of consumers said how they are going to shop is going to be the number one change, followed by the types of products they purchase, which is about 70%. And so we know that this is going to have a different impact on each category of retail, but generally speaking, we know from surveying and consumer sentiments that their consumers are generally showing greater comfort with going back to previous behaviors at physical retail and grocery stores, followed by restaurants and malls. Not surprisingly, consumers are the most reluctant to resume activities related to tourism and large gatherings. Bars, movie theaters, also not likely to bounce back as quickly. But the root of this all is consumer confidence. And unfortunately, as I mentioned briefly earlier, the second wave has taken another hit on consumer behavior. So consumer confidence dropped 9.5 points in October to 74.1, which is actually the largest monthly decrease we've seen since April, I believe. So certainly having things in place like e-commerce is going to be enormously important for, I know there is this natural tension between bricks and mortar and e-commerce, as Helen had pointed out, but you know, these were a lot of trends that were well underway before COVID-19, and COVID-19 has certainly accelerated them, and e-commerce is probably the biggest one in that vein.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. We have seen some of the trends prior to COVID as well, where we've seen the active actions almost from retailers to encourage people to go online, to shop online, to order online, and move that forward too. Thalia, we're talking that e-commerce is here to stay, and then I'm thinking of our labor force and our, our colleagues, family members, and others who are employed in the retail sector of it. When you speak to retailers, when you look at that, what impact are we anticipating a certain impact, therefore, on the labor force currently employed in retail?
So that's a great question and a point I really wanted to talk about as well, Mishka, so thank you. I think it's very interesting that we talk about these changes in retail quite frequently from an employer perspective, but there's also big implications on the workforce. So prior to COVID, people working in retail, that was their primary, retail salesperson, cashiers, et cetera. But now with the pandemic, there's so much more responsibility. So not only are you a brand ambassador and a salesperson, but you're also ensuring customers are following safety protocols. You're ensuring that there's PPE available, hand sanitizer. So there's all of these other stressors, but also responsibilities that have been added onto the workforce just from a customer and employee safety perspective. So if you put that also into context with increases in e-commerce, when we've been talking to employers recently, and when we speak to people engaged in training and skills development with the workforce, there's definitely been a push to have a workforce that is able to deal with technological solutions or be fairly IT savvy. If you are switching to more of an online venue, people would need to be able to assist in those types of activities as well. So that's definitely something that may change the requirements or at least some of the skill sets needed in the workforce. We haven't yet seen it come through when we look at job demand data. We don't see that happening, but definitely in conversations with both employers and skills development and training individuals as well. This has been a theme over since the beginning of this year. There's definitely been an increase there for sure.
Now, on that particular topic, this is a significant change for employers and employees, both at the same time, Thalia, that you mentioned, which I think is so valuable to take a look at. What kind of supports do they need to allow for that transition? Because we can't expect that everyone can just pick it up, and employers often are not skilled or ready to support them. But what and how can we support this retail sector to really move forward and pivot to the next level of excellence that is really being demanded of them and that consumers likely will welcome?
I think understanding that, I think employers have done a great job pivoting quickly and adjusting to what's been going on. So probably from a consumer perspective, knowing that businesses, employers, employees are all under stress and are transitioning right now as well and adjusting to a constantly changing environment.
Yeah. And Helen, on the same questions, do you find that retailers are looking for more resources to help their staff to develop their skills, to move them forward, to adapt to the e-commerce, to the digital skills, but at the same time, as Thalia really pointed out so well, is the health end of it and the safety concerns that are there. What are you hearing from retailers?
Yeah, so there was a big shift on that that happened actually before we reopened. As I was saying before, you saw a lot of our retailers kind of pivot and start supporting their online platforms, which allowed them to bring the employees back to our stores, which was great. But we understood that there was a lot of anxiety for a lot of people to come back into the property once our doors opened to the public. So we spent a long time actually working with them to help them understand what that new experience looked like, and then also help them understand what kind of support that they were getting from their head office. And I will say that their head offices really stepped up to the plate and provided them with everything that they needed to feel like they were going to be safe in the environment that they were working in. But I know that, and we've got quite a few employee or stores that are hiring employees right now, there was a mental shift for a lot of employees who through this started thinking about, do I want to be a frontline employee? Retail was never considered frontline in a negative way until COVID came around. And there were a lot of people that started thinking about their families and do they want to be around groups? And so they've exited out of retail, and, our stores are looking for new employees to take those positions. So I think as we go along, you're going to see more and more of our head offices actually have a focus on e-commerce customers that's probably bigger than they have right now to supplement what they're missing in the stores and to make it a lot easier for consumers.
And I think, Helen, you bring up an excellent point. Is actually one of the things that we have heard early on, like in the spring months of the pandemic, was how difficult it was actually for retailers to hire people and to ensure that they had staff on board and able to deal with it. Daniel, this is a question that has come forward as well. Many businesses have relied on government subsidies, grants, and resources to continuously operate during these times. What are some of those that have been important for the sector, and what are their sector-specific ones that maybe need to be put in place that haven't been put in place?
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. And I just want to quickly build off of what Helen and Thalia were saying as well, because one of the things the Ontario Chamber has called on as recently as our pre-budget submission a couple of weeks ago, which we published, was the need to accelerate post-pandemic reskilling, and that employers need to have the funds in place to support on-the-job workforce training. And in fact, the Quebec government had an interesting program in this regard. In the middle of the pandemic, they rolled out a $100 million fund to help employers train employees on the job. Certainly, initiatives like that are going to be important. We saw in the latest budget released last week, the provincial government has committed to a micro-credentialing framework and rolling out micro-credentials. And this is another way to help employees and those looking for work to reskill in areas that have increased demand. The other thing that I think is just worth noting is ensuring that we adopt as much as possible a diversity lens to the reskilling question. And when we talk about workforce, because we know from the numbers, both that StatsCan and others have released, that COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on women, lower income workers, visible minorities, Indigenous peoples, people with disabilities, and other underrepresented segments of the labor market. They've been disproportionately burned by this. And so when we talk about reskilling programs, when we talk about employee and employer supports, I think we need to acutely be paying attention to this aspect of the equation. With respect, very quickly, on government programs, there's obviously been a number federally and provincially that have been rolled out. There has been the Ontario Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. Sorry, I think I got that. OCIRCA. Now, the main problem with that program has been that it requires retailers to have landlords that buy into the program and also want to apply for it and basically take a hit themselves. Now, what we've called on basically since the beginning is that this is no good. We need to have a program in which the commercial tenant themselves, the retailer, can apply for the rent subsidy directly to the government. And luckily, on October 9th, the federal government introduced the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, which importantly allows retailers and commercial tenants themselves to directly apply for this rent subsidy. So how much that will help, perhaps it came a little bit too late. In fact, most of what we hear from the businesses is that it has come too late, but we hope that still that will provide important relief. The other program that the government has rolled out, of course, early on into the pandemic was wage subsidies through the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy Program, which will also help hopefully keep more employees on the payroll. But I think the biggest thing right now is to ensure that there is both supports for employees and those looking for work to get retrained and have the appropriate skills for areas that are in demand, but that also retailers and employers can apply for things like rent subsidies when they've seen their incomes and their revenues drop precipitously over the course of the pandemic.
I really appreciate it. We hear from retailers the wage subsidy is key to it, and then the rent assistance is the second one that often people are asking for. But I think your point, Daniel, that you made at the beginning of it, saying that the reskilling of the labor force is essential as we're moving forward in this particular one. I wanted to, we are getting close to the time of Black Friday, and there's a question that was emailed to us, and maybe I'm passing it on to you, Helen. With the border closure and Canadian shoppers having to spend their Black Friday shopping in this country, they are asking, they wanted to see what impact this could potentially have on small businesses that are there. Could we project a larger crowd of shopping centers or at smaller stores throughout Niagara, or do we expect many shoppers to avoid Black Friday altogether? What are you looking at when you're looking at that weekend?
Well, that's a great question, and Black Friday is probably one of the hot topics right now, next to Santa. So what our research indicates is typically about 25 to 30% of our shoppers each year actually spend Black Friday in the States and spend their dollars there. So with the borders closed, we're looking that not just us, but our other competitors in the area will actually benefit from those dollars staying in the community. One of the things that we're very aware of, though, is the crowds. And typically Black Friday, I like to think that Canadians treat Black Friday with a little bit more of decency. We're not taking out our neighbors to get the $40 TV, but definitely we see crowds. So I believe it was probably in June or July, two of the US retail giants, which was Walmart and Target, both announced that they would not be open for Black Friday, that they were going to extend their sales and try and thin out the crowds, if you were, so that there wasn't this sense of urgency on one day. And that just led the momentum across the board. And so what you're going to see at Penn Center and probably at every shopping center across Canada is that we're telling consumers you have 5, 6, maybe even 2 weeks to shop for Black Friday deals. You know, tenants are extending those programs so that we don't see everybody come in on one day. There is no need to do that. And we understand that they're still, even though we have a lot of great protocols in place and, you know, we have created an environment that people feel safe to shop at, we understand there's still a very large percent that are on the fence as to whether or not they want to come into an indoor place. So providing that e-commerce outline, providing that curbside pickup platform is going to help us really, you know, kind of appeal to a lot of shoppers. But again, it's about several days versus one day. That's the key.
Yeah, and I think that people are in that frame of mind already, I think, when it comes to it, because we're celebrating it so differently too, because we also don't have the gatherings around the same time too, as we might have done at other times too. Daniel, I think this is a question for one of our attendees, and I think it's geared towards you. It's by Kim O'Rourke, and the question is there cost to the micro-credentials, and how do people access them? Is there a link in developing micro-credentials for some of the staff?
That is a great question, and the short answer is stay tuned. We're waiting to hear more from what this is going to look like from the government. We know in the latest budget they've committed to about $60 million to rolling out Ontario's micro-credential strategy. New funding is supposed to be for creating an online portal to access micro-credential training opportunities, incentivizing the development of micro-credential opportunities that reflect labor market demands, and promoting micro-credentials to prospective learners and employers. So, of course, the short answer is we don't know exactly how this is going to look like and what the costs associated are going to be, but we do see this as a step in the right direction from the government, acknowledging that we do need kind of these rapid reskilling programs and opportunities to reflect fluctuating demand in terms of the labor market.
And Kim, thank you so very much for bringing the question forward. At the GNCC, we implemented from Monday to Friday to have daily updates. We will keep people posted on any information related to this particular topic because we know it's really critically important. And if you haven't signed up on it, just go to gncc.ca. It's free, sign up, and we will keep you posted on this topic as well. Thalia, I wanted to bring you into the dialogue because Niagara Workforce Planning Board, Literacy Link Niagara, and actually us, the GNCC, are working on a new project with a spotlight on Niagara's retail sector. And the project aims to have a conversation between the employers, employees, and job seekers in the retail trade sector to learn more about their needs. And I was wondering if I can ask you maybe to expand on it for a moment because this can be critically helpful to employers in Niagara and the retail sector overall.
Yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned, the three organizations are working on a partnership project. And part of today's discussion is really to shed light and insight on current trends in retail, both in Niagara, but also, from a wider lens as well. So we know what's going on, provincially, but also nationally as well, particularly in light of the world of COVID where we are now living in. So throughout the project, we're having conversations with local employers, employees, people working in municipal and regional government, job seekers and retail trade, so we can really get a good sense of the employment related needs given what's going on with the pandemic. But we're also consulting with local organizations that provide skills development and training to identify workforce development opportunities. As we know, retail, alongside many other employment sectors in Niagara and nationwide, have been hit quite hard. So we're always willing to hear from employers that might be out there and are keen to give a voice to their story. Same with those working in the workforce, as it'll help put together action plans moving forward as we continue on through the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you so very much. And if anyone here needs on the webinar needs any more information on it, please feel free to connect with us directly, and we'll love to provide you with any more insight on it. I'm a little bit conscious of the time of it, and a couple of times during this dialogue, because we only have a couple of minutes left, we talked about the future of retail, we talked about the second wave that we're faced with, but also earlier this week or late last week, we heard also about the potential of vaccine coming forward. In the closing comments, and each one of you have about a minute, can you touch base on exactly that and how you see, what do you see the future of retail to be like as we're moving forward? If we have an hourglass and could look 5-10 years ahead of into the future and saying, like, I think this is where its strengths will be, this is how it's going to grow and develop. And maybe respectively, not just looking at the retail sector, but also looking at it from an employment point of view. And Helen, maybe if I could throw you the ball first, ask you to answer first, and then we'll pass it on from here.
Well, I can say that I've been wishing that I had a crystal ball during this entire time. I think we all are. I would say that I think that the future for retail isn't that much different than it was prior to COVID, in the sense that for shopping centers specifically, we're looking to diversify and, bringing in retail, bringing in residential, bringing in entertainment. People are looking for that experience where it's more of a one-stop shopping experience. And even now more so that we're in a situation where people want to limit the amount of places that they have to go to, that would be even more critical for us. In the future, definitely e-commerce is, just to Daniel's point, to Thalia's point, e-commerce is not going away. And so that is a big thing for us, as we're constantly looking about how we can integrate the bricks and mortar experience with an e-commerce experience and have kind of the best of the both worlds. But one thing that I have learned through this past few months is that we can never underestimate the human connection. And one thing that we saw on opening day is that people were just happy to be around people. And, you know, we all probably saw it in our neighborhoods. I saw neighbors that I hadn't seen in a long time, suddenly on bikes, walking their dogs. You know, everybody just wanted to be out and they wanted to be around energy. And so for that reason, I would say you're never going to get that on e-commerce, but you will get that in those local stores and the local mall that you'll always feel like you can build memories in. So we're here to stay, but we're always going to pivot as we need to pivot.
You know, Helen, I'm so glad that you brought up that human connection, because we as a chamber were a convener too that held like 60 some events a year, connecting people and bringing them together. And naturally we pivoted to move on to this virtual platform too. But there's so many people who are still saying how much they're actually missing that human connection. And I think that's where the shopping aspect of it is so critical, that of running into someone and connecting with them. Daniel, over to you.
Yeah, so would definitely like to echo what Helen's saying, and to just close by saying thank you, Mishka, to you and your colleagues at the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce for hosting us and this important and timely discussion. And I should also give you guys a quick shout out as well, because those survey numbers that I was rhyming off at the beginning, the only reason we have that localized data for your region is because of your help to help distribute that survey as well to your members and to your network. So want to thank you for that. Look, I think we've talked about the fact that COVID-19 has accelerated a lot of the trends and the shifts in consumer behaviors that were already well underway prior to the crisis. So yeah, increased demand for e-commerce and delivery service, but also increased interest and demand for locally made, environmentally sustainable and socially conscious products. I think as we talk about all the negative impacts of the crisis, it's important to see that trends in that area have also been accelerated, which is good news. You know, we're also seeing in terms of the future of retail, you know, automated checkout options, as well as other digital, more self-guided experiential experiments in stores. And I think that will have a downstream impact on employment. We also see that younger consumers are more likely to look for additional reasons to justify a trip to the store. So, you know, younger consumers are more likely to want additional services such as a coffee bar or a spa inside of a store, because they look at it as a source of fun. They look at a trip to the store as a source of fun. The one thing I just quickly note in this discussion, which we haven't really touched on, is the importance of broadband access for retailers and their consumers alike. When we talk about the increasing shift to e-commerce and how prominent that has become, of course, that assumes that both employers and their prospective consumers have access to e-commerce. And unfortunately, the situation in Ontario was such that huge swaths of retailers, particularly in more rural and remote communities, but you don't have to look that far, actually don't have good broadband access. So that is something that I know our chamber and yours has been beating the drum over, and we will continue to do, so that when shifts like this and as shifts like this are taking place, that opportunity is there for retailers.
Thank you so very much, and really valued point of it too, with the broadband aspect of it. Thank you for bringing it forward. And Thalia, closing comments from you.
Sure. So like Helen, it would be great to have a crystal ball so we knew what was coming. But some insights we do have. So in the end of May and beginning of June, the Niagara Economic Rapid Response Team conducted a survey, and one of the questions they asked employers were, what changes do you plan to maintain that have been brought on by COVID-19 moving forward? And the top two from retail employers that responded were keeping increased use of PPE in the workplace, but also keeping curbside pickup and delivery moving forward. So those might be two shifts that might be more permanent moving forward. But also from conversations we've been having locally, it seems like employers feel fairly comfortable with how they've prepared their in-store experience. They had to pivot quickly. So now that we're in wave 2, people we've spoken to have indicated they feel prepared for what's going on right now through, you know, using PPE, directional signs, having dividers, and other safety measures.
Thalia, Daniel, Helen, thank you so very much for being with us this morning. I have really been looking forward to this dialogue. It is so critical to so many businesses in Niagara and Ontario-wide. So thank you for your insight and your expertise. And my thanks also go to TD for partnering with us this morning. You are a valuable partner by our side, allowing for these dialogues to take place. So it's wonderful. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on our website at gncc.ca and will be emailed to all webinar participants directly. We have spoken about a few resources that were mentioned. For a complete list of all resources available to businesses, please check out our website. And you can always reach us directly at any time. My direct email is mishka@gncc.ca. We are here to help you. And lastly, to all attendees and participants, thank you so very much for joining us. Please stay in touch and above all, stay healthy. Thank you.